So for you, going between Argentina and Peru, did you have any kind of hassle with that and with things changing, or how were you able to navigate the differences and the little things, the nuances between Argentine Spanish and the way it's spoken in Peru?
I think the most struggles came when I moved to Chile
Mm.
because the language there, Chilean Spanish is unique in many different ways. And I'm saying this for good, for worse. Though for it's happened more than a couple of times when I said something and people had no clue what I was saying. Though I was using the word that most of the Spanish-speaking countries will use for something specific, and they didn't understand what I was saying. And then, actually, my very first experience, but we'll get to this point in a few minutes, I guess, as a translator, because I studied, I did translation studies. Actually, my very first job as a translator was with a Chilean company. They had an import-export business in the southern coasts of Peru, and I was lucky to be hired to do telephone interpretation and then to translate some legal documents back in the late 90s. And because we got along, really well, and they were very kind to me, and I remember the first time I was invited to supper. Um, I was sitting at the table with, the two managers, their children, and they were all speaking Chilean Spanish, and I was like moving, just moving my face from one side to the other side, not understanding much of what was going on. And it was shocking because it was my language as well, but it
Yeah.
was so different that I was getting roughly 50% of what was going on. Uh-huh.
Whoa.
Yes. So I would say, how do I navigate that? There are some things I have learned to do, and there is a very interesting theory. I can't recall who wrote it, but the name is the uh, communication accommodation theory, CAT, right? So sometimes you converge or diverge, or you maintain, depending on how you want to be perceived. For example, when I take a taxi, an Uber, and it's driven by a senior Chilean man or someone about my age, I don't want to be perceived as non-local. I mean, I can blend very easily, but so I just try to imitate the accents, the way, some sounds that I will normally not do, just because I want him to feel comfortable. Because Chile, in a way, has not. Well, right now it's different, but let's say people my age or older. I'm 48 right now. We're not actually very exposed to foreigners. Immigration was not a thing, so they might still feel awkward about immigrants or expats, and they were not used to that. So I don't want to cause this awkwardness, in the moment. So I just, go with the flow. Though, but if I'm speaking to someone younger, like someone in their 20s, I will use my own accent, my own variety, because I do want to be perceived as different in a way,
Right.
you know. Most of the times, it has not been a problem to get to communicate. Um, or to get my message across. But I do have some funny experiences, with some particular terms meaning something really opposite, or with some verbs. This is funny. For example, in many of the Spanish-speaking countries, the verb coger, it means to grab something, to take something, except in Mexico and Argentina, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I still giggle a bit when I hear coger, because to me it means something very different. And I can, or if I'm trying just to, to be funny, I would just, like underline the word, say like, really, do you mean that? um, what else?
See, I learned that when I started this podcast, someone was telling me about the difference, and I was like, "Oh, I've heard both of those words." I mean, I've heard that word used in both ways, but it never occurred to me that it was one way in Mexico and one way in you said Argentina, but
Argentina, Mexico use the same meaning for coger, which means like to have sex,
mhm.
and it's rude to say that.
Yeah.
While the rest of the countries, the meaning is just to grab something or to
Mhm.
catch something.
Yeah.
Like you can use it to take a like to catch a bus, to catch a train, to catch a taxi, right? But you don't say that verb in Argentina or Mexico. And I always say this, don't say that unless you mean it. So it's very peculiar, and there are some interesting terms too. Like I remember back in the 90s, it was some experience because this was the time when technology started to be more massive. Like for example, when people like regular people started to have internet in their homes, and that was
Yeah.
my case. Before that, it was not a thing, and it was so uncommon. So I remember I started to use some voice chats we had like back then, like IceQ and another one. But anyway, I connected with a very nice lady from Mexico, and by then I had never been to Mexico, and then I was talking about something, that I think it was like in winter, and I said like I had to put on a jacket, which in Spanish, in all of the countries except in Mexico means chaqueta. That's the word, right? So, and then she just laughed, and she couldn't stop, and I didn't understand what was going on. Then she said, "You know what that means in Mexico?" I said, like, no. And it had a sexual connotation that had
Oh.
never occurred to me. So, and then I thought, well, yeah, you might want to be careful with some words, but then again, if you say something, people will realize you're not a local and you're using a different variety, and that'll be fine. But for some terms and some specific verbs, you might actually mean something very, very different.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I will say if you learned like standard, and by standard, I would probably say Mexican or Colombia, you'll be fine most of the times.
Mhm.
But it's the subtleties with certain terms, with the idiom that might either make you not understand what's going on, or you might perceive that someone like using careless language. But it depends on where you are.
Right.
Like Argentina is also an island. Like it's very funny how the average Argentine person calls the rest of the variety of Spanish. There is a term we say neutral, to speak neutral. Like, oh yeah, for example, this show, because of the huge influence of Mexican television programs, now children are speaking neutral, and many parents are not very happy with that because they feel like their Argentine accent is being
Mhm.
lost,
Mhm.
right? Because of the
Right.
neutral influence. But it's funny because first of all, neutral accents do not exist, but we call neutral, and they call neutral to any variety not using vos as the second person singular pronoun, and using tu instead,
Mm.
which tu is you. But for the rest of it's not really a problem. I mean, drastic differences, no. But I would say if you go to Chile and you studied standard Spanish, you might not understand what's going on at the very beginning. I always tend to compare, sorry, Chile to, I mean, Chilean Spanish probably to the English spoken in the north of England,
Mm.
which is the same
Mhm.
language, but it's pronounced so differently that at times you might be confused.